The grand chandeliers shimmered, reflecting off the polished marble floors of the Hampton estate, the most luxurious wedding venue in the city. Everything about this event screamed perfection, from the golden-trimmed floral arrangements to the meticulously arranged seating for the nearly 200 guests, each dressed in their finest attire. The sound of the classical quartet filled the air as guests whispered excitedly, awaiting the moment when the bride would walk down the aisle. And then the doors swung open. A hush fell over the crowd. Standing at the entrance was a man who did not belong, a man whose presence sent a ripple of unease through the elegant celebration. Dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, Dorian Vance stepped into the room with the quiet confidence of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. He was a figure of power and wealth, known throughout the city for his ruthless business acumen and unwavering determination. But today, he was not here to close a deal. Today, he was here to ruin a wedding. Guests exchanged confused glances. Some recognized him instantly, the self-made millionaire, the media mogul, the man who had built an empire from nothing. But why was he here? Dorian ignored the murmurs as he strode forward, his gaze locked onto one person. The bride. At the altar, standing beneath an archway adorned with white roses, Alora's heart went pale. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet she was holding, her knuckles turning white. For a moment, it was as if time had stopped. Then, he spoke. "I wouldn't say yes just yet, Alora." The words sliced through the air like a dagger. Gasps erupted across the room. The groom, a handsome but visibly stunned man named Thomas Whitaker, turned sharply toward Alora, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. The officiant, a kind-eyed older man, froze mid-sentence, looking between the bride and the uninvited guest. Dorian's voice was calm, but the weight of his presence was anything but. He took another slow step forward, his eyes never leaving Alora's. "You're forgetting something, aren't you? Or should I say, someone's?" Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Alora's lips parted, but no words came. Dorian tilted his head slightly, studying her reaction. He had expected anger. He had expected defiance. But this? This was fear. The guests were now whispering furiously. Who was this man? And what did he mean? Alora's hands trembled. She looked down, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. Dorian took one more step. "You left without a word, Alora. 5 years ago, you disappeared. I searched for you. I wanted answers. And now, I have them." Alora swallowed hard. She looked at Thomas, whose face had twisted into an expression of growing unease. Dorian continued, his voice dipping lower, forcing everyone to lean in, hanging on to his every word. "I know why you left. And I know what you've been hiding." A lone tear slipped down Alora's cheek. And in that moment, everything changed. The moment Dorian's words sliced through the air, the entire wedding reception seemed to freeze. The whispers turned into hushed gasps, and the weight of his presence pressed down on everyone like a brewing storm. Alora's breath hitched in her throat. She felt the eyes of nearly 200 guests piercing into her like daggers. Thomas, her groom, stood stiff beside her, his hands tightening at his sides. She had spent years burying the past, but now the past was here, standing in the middle of the aisle, demanding to be seen. 5 years ago. The city skyline stretched high above them as Alora leaned against the balcony of Dorian Vance's penthouse, her heart pounding against her ribs. It had been 3 years since she first met him, a chance encounter at a charity gala where he had barely looked at her. At the time, she had been just another struggling designer, working on commission, designing dresses for clients who never paid on time. But somehow, Dorian noticed her. And when he did, his attention had been all-consuming. At first, it had been a dream, romantic getaways, whispered promises, extravagant gifts that left her breathless. She felt seen, adored, chosen. Until she realized what came with being chosen by a man like Dorian. Dorian had never known what it meant to lose. Every deal he made, every competitor he crushed, every room he walked into, he was the king. He had built his empire from the ground up, from a childhood of poverty to one of the most powerful men in the country. And he expected the same from his relationships. At first, it was subtle. "I don't like that dress on you. Wear the blue one. You don't need to work, Elora. I can take care of you. Why are you out so late? I don't like not knowing where you are." Then, it became suffocating. One night, she had returned home late from a client meeting, just a simple dinner, business, nothing more. But when she walked through the door of their shared penthouse, Dorian was already waiting. Sitting in the dimly lit living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Not angry. Not yelling. Just watching. "Tell me, Elora, do you enjoy making me wonder?" The words sent a chill through her. "Wonder what?" she asked, voice quieter than she intended. "Whether or not I should trust you." She had laughed, but his expression never changed. That was the night she realized, she needed to leave. But leaving Dorian Vance was not so simple. The night she disappeared. Elora had spent months planning her escape. She waited until Dorian was away on a business trip, packed only what she could fit into a single bag, and vanished. No phone calls. No messages. Just gone. She knew he would look for her. She knew he would never stop searching. But she also knew something else. She was pregnant. 3 months along. She had found out weeks before she left, and when she saw those 2 pink lines on the test, she knew one thing. Dorian could never know. Not because she wanted to keep his children from him, but because she feared what he would become if he knew she had something he wanted. So she ran. Far away. Back to the present. At the altar, Elora struggled to breathe. Dorian's words echoed in her head. "I know why you left. And I know what you've been hiding." Thomas turned to her, his eyes filled with questions. "Elora," his voice was low, strained. "Is this true?" Elora's grip on the bouquet tightened. Her mind raced. Dorian knew. He had found out. But how? Slowly, Dorian took another step forward. His icy blue eyes locked onto hers, filled with something darker than anger. "I searched for you." His voice was controlled, dangerous. "For years, I searched. And when I finally found you, I found them." Gasps erupted across the room. Elora's knees nearly gave out. Them. He knew about the children. A murmur swept through the crowd as the realization hit. The perfect wedding was crumbling, and all anyone could do was watch. Elora forced herself to breathe, her eyes darting toward the exit. She needed to get out. But Dorian wasn't finished. His voice turned low, almost gentle, but it cut through her like a blade. "Did you ever plan on telling me?" Tears pricked at her eyes. She knew there was no way out of this. So, she whispered the only thing she could. "I had no choice." The room fell into complete silence. Dorian's jaw clenched. Thomas took a slow step backward, as if the weight of everything had just crushed him. The wedding guests were no longer whispering, they were waiting. Watching. And in that moment, Elora knew. Everything had changed. The tension in the room was unbearable. Elora stood frozen at the altar, her entire world crashing down around her. She could barely hear the gasps of the wedding guests, the frantic whispers, or the way Thomas, her soon-to-be husband, took a hesitant step away from her. All she could hear was the blood pounding in her ears as Dorian's words rang over and over again. "I know why you left. And I know what you've been hiding." Her 3 sons. He knew about them. And if Dorian knew, then everything she had fought to protect was now in danger. The fallout begins. Is it true? Thomas's voice was quiet, but the force behind it made her flinch. Elora, tell me he's lying. Elora swallowed hard, her throat dry, her hands trembling. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to tell Thomas that Dorian was just trying to stir up trouble, that this was some cruel joke orchestrated by a bitter ex. But the truth was written all over her face. And everyone could see it. A ripple of shock passed through the wedding guests. Some exchanged knowing glances, others leaned in to whisper behind gloved hands. The perfect, elegant wedding had suddenly turned into a scandalous, high-society nightmare. Dorian, on the other hand, looked unmoved. If anything, he seemed satisfied. 5 days earlier, Dorian had spent years trying to bury the ache that Elora had left behind. When she disappeared, he had been furious that she had left, furious that she had walked away from him without a single word. But more than anything, he had been obsessed with finding out why. For 5 years, she had managed to stay hidden, slipping through his grasp each time he got close. But then, 1 week ago, everything changed. His private investigator, Vincent Hale, a man with a reputation for uncovering even the deepest secrets, had finally found her. And what he found shattered everything Dorian thought he knew. A small town, far from the city. A quiet life. A modest home. And inside that home, 3 little boys. All with his eyes. Dorian had stared at the photographs for hours, his mind refusing to accept what he was seeing. My children. Rage had boiled in his chest. How could she have kept this from him? How could she have stolen away something so precious, something he never even knew existed? For years, he had convinced himself that Elora had simply moved on, that she had run away to be with another man. But now, he knew the truth. She had run because of him. The wedding infiltration. The moment Dorian discovered the truth, he knew what he had to do. He wasn't the kind of man to sit idly by and accept betrayal. Elora had taken something from him. And now, he was going to take everything from her. Vincent had tracked down the details of Elora's upcoming wedding, and Dorian saw his opportunity. He had walked through the doors of the Hampton estate with only one goal, to make sure Elora never said, "I do." And now, standing in front of her, watching as the color drained from her face, he knew he had succeeded. Back to the present. Elora's chest tightened as she stared at Thomas, his face now a mixture of heartbreak and betrayal. She opened her mouth to speak, but Dorian beat her to it. She left me 5 years ago. No explanation. No warning. His voice was steady, controlled. Dangerous. And now, I finally know why. Thomas turned back to Elora, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Tell me the truth, Elora, he said, his voice shaking. Are they his? Her vision blurred with tears. She wanted to lie. She wanted to protect everything she had built. But she couldn't. She nodded. The gasp that rippled through the crowd was deafening. Thomas stumbled back, his entire body stiff with shock. My God! The wedding guests erupted into a storm of whispers and murmurs. Did you ever plan on telling me? Dorian pressed, his voice like steel. Elora snapped her head up, her expression twisting with fury. You don't get to act like the victim, she spat. You don't get to waltz in here and act like you care, like you ever cared. Dorian's jaw clenched. You took my children from me. Her hands shook. I took them away to protect them. A flicker of something, *** pain. Doubt, crossed Dorian's face. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He let out a humorless chuckle. Protect them? From me? Elora's lip quivered, but she refused to back down. Yes, she whispered. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. Suffocating. Dorian tilted his head slightly, studying her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he smirked. "Fine," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Then let's see what the courts have to say about that." Elora's stomach dropped. "You wouldn't." "I would." Terror raced through her veins. Because she knew him. She knew Dorian Vance better than anyone. And when he wanted something, he never stopped until he got it. The wedding was ruined. The guests were in shock. The groom was broken. But Dorian? Dorian had only just begun. The walls of the Hampton Estate ballroom seemed to close in on Elora. The chandelier's golden glow suddenly felt too bright, the murmurs of the guests too loud, the weight of her secrets too heavy. Dorian Vance had just shattered her world in front of everyone. Then let's see what the courts have to say about that. His words echoed in her mind like a relentless drumbeat. A custody battle. Her worst fear had just come true. The last thread of hope. Thomas, her groom, stood frozen, looking at Elora like he was seeing her for the first time. His hands were clenched at his sides, his lips slightly parted in disbelief. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You had his children?" Elora's throat burned. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But there was nowhere left to hide. She turned to Thomas, desperate to find something, anything, that might keep this from falling apart. "I was going to tell you. After the wedding. I just..." Dorian let out a bitter chuckle. "After the wedding?" He took a slow step forward, his glacier blue eyes piercing through her. "How thoughtful of you." Thomas took a sharp breath, and the raw pain in his face nearly broke her. "You told me you never wanted children." Elora felt her heart crack. Because that was true. She had lied to Thomas. Not because she didn't love him, but because she was terrified of what the truth would bring. Dorian was living proof of that. Thomas's jaw clenched as he shook his head. "I don't even know who you are, Elora." And just like that, the last thread of hope snapped. The man she was supposed to spend the rest of her life with took one step back. Then another. Then, he turned and walked out. A wave of gasps spread through the crowd. The wedding was officially over. Elora stood there, motionless, as the guests slowly began to murmur, to whisper, to leave. But she didn't care about them. Her gaze locked onto Dorian. The man who had just destroyed everything. The real reason she left. "You think you've won?" she whispered, her voice shaking with fury. Dorian just tilted his head slightly. "I don't think, Elora." "I know." Her blood boiled. "You still don't get it, do you?" "Enlighten me," he said smoothly. Elora took a step forward, refusing to back down. "You pushed me away long before I ever left," she said. "Do you even remember? Do you remember the way you made me feel?" Dorian's face remained unreadable, but his fists tightened at his sides. "You controlled everything," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "The way I dressed. The places I went. The people I saw. And if I ever tried to push back, you..." She stopped herself. Because the memory was still raw. Still painful. The night she had left, Dorian hadn't yelled. He hadn't thrown things or lost his temper. He had done something worse. "If you walk out that door, Elora, you will regret it for the rest of your life." She could still hear his voice, low and cold, filled with a quiet threat that made her bones tremble. "No one leaves me, Elora. Not without consequences." That was the moment she had realized, Dorian Vance was never going to let her be free. That was the moment she knew she had to disappear forever. So she did. And for 5 years, she had prayed that he would never find her. But now? He was standing right in front of her, proving that he never truly let her go. Dorian's next move. Dorian's smirk finally faltered. For the first time that night, a flicker of something crossed his face. Was it remorse? Regret? Recognition? But it was gone as quickly as it had come. I did what I had to do, he said simply. And you? You ran. Elora let out a hollow laugh. And you still think you deserve to know about them? Dorian's expression hardened. They are my children, Elora, he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. And nothing, not even you, is going to keep me from them. A chill ran through her. Because she knew Dorian. When he wanted something, he never stopped until he got it. The unexpected visitor. Before she could respond, a voice rang out from the back of the room. Mommy? Elora's heart stopped. No. No, no, no. Her head snapped toward the entrance, and there, standing just beyond the threshold, was a little boy. His big blue eyes, identical to Dorian's, scanned the room with innocent curiosity. The entire crowd fell into stunned silence. Elora couldn't breathe. Mommy? He asked again, taking a cautious step forward. Behind him, a woman in her early 50s, Elora's closest friend, Evelyn, stood frozen. She had been watching the boys back at the house. They were never supposed to be here. But somehow, they had found their way to the wedding. And now, one of them had walked straight into Dorian's world. Dorian's entire body went still. He had seen the photographs. He had known they existed. But now? Now, one of his sons was standing right in front of him. Elora felt her entire world crumbling beneath her feet. Dorian slowly turned his head toward her, his expression unreadable. How old is he? His voice was eerily soft. Elora swallowed hard. Her throat burned. She knew that if she told the truth, there would be no going back. But there was nothing left to hide. 5, she whispered. Dorian exhaled sharply, as if the wind had just been knocked out of him. Because that number confirmed it. He had become a father the moment she had left. And he had never known. For the first time that night, Dorian didn't look angry. He looked lost. The little boy blinked up at him, completely unaware of the storm that had just been unleashed. And then, softly, he asked the question that made Elora's stomach drop. Are you my daddy? The room went dead silent. Dorian's lips parted slightly. His hands trembled at his sides. And for the first time in his life, Dorian Vance didn't know what to say. A silence so thick it felt tangible settled over the grand ballroom. The once extravagant wedding was now nothing more than a shattered illusion, an elegant setting for a confrontation that no one had expected. Elora's heart pounded against her ribs, her pulse erratic as she stared at the small boy standing just beyond the threshold of the venue. His eyes, Dorian's eyes, blinked up at the man before him. Are you my daddy? The words were innocent, spoken without hesitation, without understanding the tsunami of emotions they had just unleashed. Dorian didn't move. Didn't breathe. For the first time in the entirety of his ruthless, calculated life, he was frozen. His hands, the same hands that had built an empire from nothing, the same hands that had crushed rivals without mercy, trembled at his sides. Because standing before him was his son. Elora's desperate plea. Elora was the first to react. Her entire body screamed for her to move, to reach for her child, to take him away from this place before things spiraled even further out of control. She took a step forward, forcing a calmness into her voice that she did not feel. Sweetheart, she called gently, come here. Mommy's here. The little boy hesitated, looking between his mother and the stranger standing before him. His small brows furrowed, confusion flickering across his delicate features. Evelyn, still standing in the doorway, finally snapped out of her frozen state. She gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, guiding him back a step. But Dorian's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Wait." Elora flinched, instinctively shielding her son behind her. Dorian finally moved, but he didn't step forward. He simply lowered himself to one knee, leveling his gaze with the child who had just shattered every wall he had ever built. The resemblance was undeniable. The boy had his hair, his jawline, his eyes. His son. Dorian's breath came shallow, uneven. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it before. The boy hesitated. Elora's heart clenched. "Please, don't answer. Please, just let me take you away from here." But her son, too young to understand the weight of this moment, whispered. "Adrian." Dorian's chest rose and fell unsteadily. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his jaw tightening, like he was barely holding himself together. "Adrian," he repeated, as if he was testing the name on his tongue for the first time. As if he was trying to commit it to memory. Then, ever so slowly, he lifted his gaze to Elora. "How many?" Elora's hands clenched into fists. She knew what he was asking. How many children had she hidden from him? Her silence was answer enough. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice tight, controlled. "3, she said. Dorian's breath hitched. 3. 3 sons. 3 children that had his blood running through their veins, his name buried within them. And he had never known. A man who had never lost. Dorian Vance had never lost. Not a deal, not a case, not a single moment of power in his life. Until now. Because he had lost 5 years of his children's lives. Their first words. Their first steps. Their first birthdays. Because of her. Dorian stood, slow, deliberate, and when he looked at Elora, his expression was no longer just anger. It was devastation. "You had my children," he said, his voice like crushed glass. "And you took them from me." Elora's chest tightened. She knew he wouldn't understand. He would never see that she had done what she had to do. "Dorian," she whispered, "you don't." But he wasn't listening anymore. The heartbreak in his face hardened. His fingers curled into fists, his entire posture shifting from stunned to dangerous. "If you think I'm going to let you keep them from me," he said, voice deathly quiet, "you're out of your mind. The war begins." The guests were completely forgotten. The wreckage of the wedding, the abandoned vows, the whispers of the high society elite, none of it mattered anymore. This was now a war. Elora shook her head, her fury rising to meet his. "You don't get to just walk in here and decide you want to play father now," she snapped. "That's not how this works." Dorian's eyes darkened. "I don't need your permission," he said. Elora took a step toward him, her voice shaking with rage. "You have no idea what it means to be a father. You don't get to claim them just because you suddenly decided to care." Dorian didn't flinch. "And you don't get to keep them from me just because you're afraid of the truth." She stilled. Because she knew exactly what truth he was talking about. The truth she had spent 5 years running from. The final blow. Dorian took another slow step toward her. "Tell them why you really left," he said. Elora's breath caught in her throat. "Tell them what you were really afraid of," he pressed. Her hands shook. "Dorian." "Tell them," he demanded, his voice sharp as a blade. Elora's stomach twisted. Because she couldn't. Because if she did, it would change everything. Dorian smirked bitterly. "That's what I thought." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, he delivered the final blow. "I'll see you in court," he said. Elora's vision blurred. Dorian turned on his heel, walking away without another word. And as the doors slammed behind him, she realized the truth. This wasn't just a fight for her children. This was a fight for her past, her future, and the secret that could destroy them all. The doors of the Hampton Estate ballroom slammed shut, echoing through the now nearly empty venue. Dorian was gone. But he had left behind a storm that Elora could not escape. Her wedding was ruined. Her fiancé had walked away. And now, the man she had spent 5 years hiding from was about to take her to court, to fight for the children he never knew existed. For a moment, she couldn't move. Couldn't think. Her body felt numb, detached, like she was watching her life crumble from outside of herself. Then, a small hand slipped into hers. She looked down to see Adrian, her son, staring up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mommy," he whispered. "Did I do something bad?" Elora's heart snapped in two. She dropped to her knees, pulling Adrian into her arms, holding him tightly. "You did nothing wrong, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Nothing at all." But deep down, Elora knew the truth. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The courtroom showdown. 3 weeks later, Elora sat in a courtroom downtown, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The air was thick with tension. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest like a crushing weight. Dorian sat at the other end of the room, flanked by his high-powered attorneys, sharks in designer suits. She barely recognized him. Gone was the man who had stormed into her wedding, fueled by rage and betrayal. The man sitting across from her now was colder, sharper, more calculated. He was here to win. And that terrified her. The judge's decision. The proceedings dragged on for hours. Dorian's attorneys painted a picture of a powerful, responsible father who had been robbed of his right to know his own children. Elora's lawyers fought back, arguing that she had left to protect them, that Dorian had been controlling, overbearing, emotionally suffocating. But Dorian's response had been devastating. "I would have changed," he had said, his voice raw, stripped of its usual arrogance. "If she had told me, I would have changed." The courtroom had fallen into silence. And Elora had nothing to say. Because a part of her wondered if that was true. In the end, the judge's ruling was a compromise. Dorian would not receive full custody. But he would be given a chance. Supervised visits. A slow introduction into the lives of the children he had never known. It wasn't the complete victory he had wanted. But it was enough. Dorian meets his sons. A week later, Elora stood in the park, watching from a distance. Dorian sat on the grass, his expensive suit jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up. And in front of him sat 3 little boys. 3 perfect, innocent children who had no idea how much pain and history existed between their parents. They only knew that the man in front of them was their father. And that he was trying. Elora's throat tightened as she watched Dorian laugh, a real, genuine laugh, as Adrian tugged at his tie, giggling. For the first time, she saw not the ruthless businessman. Not the man she had once feared. She saw a father. A new beginning. As the sun began to set, Dorian approached her slowly. For a long moment, they simply stood there. Then, Dorian spoke. "I didn't expect this to be easy," he admitted. "And I don't expect you to forgive me." Elora swallowed, but said nothing. "But I want them to know me," he continued. "Not the man I was. The man I'm trying to be." She studied him, searching for the arrogance, the coldness, the selfishness that had once pushed her away. But it wasn't there. For the first time in their lives, Dorian Vance wasn't trying to win. He was just trying to be better. Elora took a deep breath. "Then prove it," she said softly. Dorian nodded once, understanding. This wasn't about fixing the past. This was about building a future. Not just for them. For their children.